Good evening, dear listener. Tonight, we open the pages of one of the most enchanting tales ever told. But before we begin, if these quiet stories bring you peace, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. I'd truly love to know where you're listening from and what hour of the night finds you here. Our little circle now stretches across oceans, bound by stories and calm. So dim the lights, let the air grow still, and let your mind wander gently with me into tonight's story. Rapunzel. Long ago, when forests stretched unbroken and villages huddled beneath their shadow, there lived a man and his wife. For many years they had prayed for a child, yet none came. Night after night, the wife lifted her eyes to the stars and begged for mercy. But the heavens remained silent, and her heart grew heavier with longing. At the back of their humble dwelling, there was a narrow window that looked out upon a garden most marvelous to behold. Flowers of every color grew there, and rows of herbs and vegetables thrived as if touched by enchantment. But no mortal dared enter it, for it was enclosed by a high wall of stone, and the garden belonged to a witch of dreadful power. All feared her name, for she was said to weave curses with a glance and bend the will of men like reeds in the wind. One spring evening, as the wife stood at the little window, her gaze fell upon a bed of rampion, so green and fresh that it gleamed like jewels among the leaves. A sudden craving seized her, fierce as hunger. Day by day she lingered at the window, staring at the rampion until her face grew pale and her body weak. At last, when her husband asked what troubled her, she whispered with tears, "Oh, husband, unless I taste that rampion in the witch's garden, I fear I shall waste away and die." The man's heart was pierced with sorrow. Better to risk my life, he thought, than lose her to this longing. So, when dusk had fallen and shadows veiled the land, he climbed the wall, seized a handful of rampion, and brought it home. His wife prepared a salad at once, and the taste revived her, filling her with a strange delight. But the next morning, her desire returned threefold. Again she begged her husband, and again, out of love, he scaled the wall. This time, however, as he turned to leave, a terrible voice rang out. From the gloom arose the witch herself, her eyes burning like coals. "How dare you," she shrieked, "creep into my garden like a thief and steal what is mine? For this you shall pay dearly." The man fell to his knees. "Mercy, great lady, I stole only from need. My wife saw your rampion and grew so sick with longing that she would have perished without it." The witch's anger cooled into cunning. A smile, thin and sharp, curved her lips. "So it shall be," she said. "You may take as much rampion as you please, but on one condition. The child your wife shall soon bear must be given to me. I will raise it as my own." In terror, the man agreed. And when the child was born, the witch appeared, named her Rapunzel, and carried her away. Rapunzel grew into a maiden of surpassing beauty, with hair as fine as spun gold, falling in waves to the ground. But the witch, jealous and fearful of losing her, locked the girl away at the age of 12. In the heart of the forest stood a lonely tower, tall and without doors or stairs. Only a single window opened near its top. There Rapunzel lived, cut off from the world. When the witch wished to visit, she stood below and cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." Then the maiden would loosen the braids of her golden hair, and the witch would climb up as if upon a ladder woven from sunlight. Thus the years passed. Rapunzel, to ease her solitude, sang sweet songs, her voice echoing across the forest like the call of a lark. One day, a young prince, hunting nearby, heard her singing. He halted, enchanted, and returned often to listen, though he found no door to the tower. One evening, hidden among the trees, he saw the witch arrive and heard her cry her summons. When Rapunzel's hair tumbled down and the witch climbed aloft, the prince understood the secret. The next night, when dusk had fallen, he ventured forth and called, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." Obediently, the maiden lowered her golden tresses, and the prince ascended. Rapunzel trembled, for she had never seen a man before. But the prince spoke kindly, telling her how her voice had stolen his heart and left him restless until he beheld her. Her fear melted into wonder, and when he asked her to be his wife, she thought, "I like him far better than old Mother Gothel." She laid her hand in his, and her heart was bound to his. Together they plotted escape. "Bring me skeins of silk each time you come," Rapunzel said, "and I will weave a ladder. When it is finished, I shall descend, and you will bear me away on your horse." Thus, by day the witch came, and by night the prince visited. But joy cannot stay hidden forever. One day Rapunzel, in her innocence, asked, "Mother Gothel, why are you so slow to climb, when the prince reaches me in but a moment?" The witch's eyes blazed. "What do I hear, false child? I thought I had hidden you from all the world, yet you have betrayed me." In fury, she seized Rapunzel's radiant hair, hacked it off with shears, and cast her into a desolate desert to wander in misery. The witch then fastened the severed braids to the tower window and lay in wait. When the prince came that evening and cried out, the hair was lowered, and he climbed eagerly, only to behold the witch's cruel face. "Ha," she sneered, "you seek your little bird, but the nest is empty. The cat has caught her, and you shall never see her again." Stricken with grief, the prince hurled himself from the tower. Though he escaped with his life, the thorns below pierced his eyes, and he was blinded. In sorrow, he roamed the wilderness for years, living on roots and berries, weeping for his lost love. Meanwhile, Rapunzel dwelt in the desert, where she gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. She raised them alone, singing to comfort herself and her children. At last, one day, as the prince wandered hopeless, he heard a voice, faint yet familiar. Stumbling toward it, he found Rapunzel, who fell upon his neck in tears. Her weeping bathed his eyes, and by miracle, the blindness was washed away. Sight returned to him as clearly as ever. With joy beyond measure, he led Rapunzel and their children to his kingdom. There they were welcomed with delight, and they lived long and happily together, as though sorrow had been but a shadow passing before the dawn. Tom Thumb. There was once a poor countryman who used to sit in the chimney corner all evening and poke the fire, while his wife sat at her spinning wheel. And he used to say, "How dull it is without any children about us. Our house is so quiet, and other people's houses so noisy and merry." "Yes," answered his wife, and sighed. "If we could only have one, and that one ever so little, no bigger than my thumb, how happy I should be. It would indeed be having our heart's desire." Now it happened that after a while, the woman had a child, who was perfect in all his limbs, but no bigger than a thumb. Then the parents said, "He is just what we wished for, and we will love him very much." And they named him according to his stature, Tom Thumb. And though they gave him plenty of nourishment, He grew no bigger, but remained exactly the same size as when he was first born. And he had very good faculties, and was very quick and prudent, so that all he did prospered. One day his father made ready to go into the forest to cut wood, and he said, as if to himself, "Now I wish there was someone to bring the cart to meet me." "Oh, father," cried Tom Thumb, "I can bring the cart. Let me alone for that, and in proper time, too." Then the father laughed and said, "How will you manage that? You are much too little to hold the reins." "That has nothing to do with it, father. While my mother goes on with her spinning, I will sit in the horse's ear and tell him where to go." "Well," answered the father, "we will try it for once." When it was time to set off, the mother went on spinning, after setting Tom Thumb in the horse's ear, and so he drove off, crying, "Gee up, gee woe." So the horse went on quite as if his master were driving him, and drew the wagon along the right road to the wood. Now, it happened just as they turned a corner, and the little fellow was calling out, "Gee up," that two strange men passed by. "Look," said one of them, "how is this? There goes a wagon, and the driver is calling to the horse, and yet he is nowhere to be seen." "It is very strange," said the other. "We will follow the wagon and see where it belongs." And the wagon went right through the wood, up to the place where the wood had been hewed. When Tom Thumb caught sight of his father, he cried out, "Look, father, here am I with the wagon. Now take me down." The father held the horse with his left hand, and with the right he lifted down his little son out of the horse's ear, and Tom Thumb sat down on a stump, quite happy and content. When the two strangers saw him, they were struck dumb with wonder. At last one of them, taking the other aside, said to him, "Look here, the little chap would make our fortune if we were to show him in the town for money. Suppose we buy him." So they went up to the woodcutter and said, "Sell the little man to us. We will take care he shall come to no harm." "Judge, no," answered the father. "He is the apple of my eye, and not for all the money in the world would I sell him." But Tom Thumb, when he heard what was going on, climbed up by his father's coat tails, and perching himself on his shoulder, he whispered in his ear, "Father, you might as well let me go. I will soon come back again." Then the father gave him up to the two men for a large piece of money. They asked him where he would like to sit. "Oh, put me on the brim of your hat," said he. "There I can walk about and view the country, and be in no danger of falling off." So they did as he wished, and when Tom Thumb had taken leave of his father, they set off all together. And they traveled on until it grew dusk, and the little fellow asked to be set down a little while for a change, and after some difficulty they consented. So the man took him down from his hat and set him in a field by the roadside, and he ran away directly, and, after creeping about among the furrows, he slipped suddenly into a mouse hole, just what he was looking for. "Good evening, my masters. You can go home without me," cried he to them, laughing. They ran up and felt about with their sticks in the mouse hole, but in vain. Tom Thumb crept farther and farther in, and as it was growing dark, they had to make the best of their way home, full of vexation and with empty purses. When Tom Thumb found they were gone, he crept out of his hiding place underground. "It is dangerous work groping about these holes in the darkness," said he. "I might easily break my neck." But by good fortune he came upon an empty snail shell. "That's all right," said he. "Now I can get safely through the night." And he settled himself down in it. Before he had time to get to sleep, he heard two men pass by, and one was saying to the other, "How can we manage to get hold of the rich parson's gold and silver?" "I can tell you how," cried Tom Thumb. "How is this?" said one of the thieves, quite frightened. "I hear someone speak." So they stood still and listened, and Tom Thumb spoke again. "Take me with you. I will show you how to do it." "Where are you then?" asked they. "Look about on the ground and notice where the voice comes from," answered he. At last they found him and lifted him up. "You little elf," said they, "how can you help us?" "Look here," answered he. "I can easily creep between the iron bars of the parson's room and hand out to you whatever you would like to have." "Very well," said they. "We will try what you can do." So when they came to the parsonage house, Tom Thumb crept into the room, but cried out with all his might, "Will you have all that is here?" So the thieves were terrified, and said, "Do speak more softly, lest anyone should be awaked." But Tom Thumb made as if he did not hear them, and cried out again, "What would you like? Will you have all that is here?" So that the cook, who was sleeping in a room hard by, heard it, and raised herself in bed, and listened. The thieves, however, in their fear of being discovered, had run back part of the way. But they took courage again, thinking that it was only a jest of the little fellows. So they came back and whispered to him to be serious, and to hand them out something. Then Tom Thumb called out once more as loud as he could, "Oh yes, I will give it all to you, only put out your hands." Then the listening maid heard him distinctly that time, and jumped out of bed and burst open the door. The thieves ran off as if the wild huntsmen were behind them, but the maid, as she could see nothing, went to fetch a light. And when she came back with one, Tom Thumb had taken himself off, without being seen by her, into the barn. And the maid, when she had looked in every hole and corner and found nothing, went back to bed at last, and thought that she must have been dreaming with her eyes and ears open. So Tom Thumb crept among the hay, and found a comfortable nook to sleep in, where he intended to remain until it was day, and then to go home to his father and mother. But other things were to befall him. Indeed, there is nothing but trouble and worry in this world. The maid got up at dawn of day to feed the cows. The first place she went to was the barn, where she took up an armful of hay, and it happened to be the very heap in which Tom Thumb lay asleep. And he was so fast asleep that he was aware of nothing, and never waked until he was in the mouth of the cow, who had taken him up with the hay. "Oh dear," cried he, "how is it that I have got into a mill?" But he soon found out where he was, and he had to be very careful not to get between the cow's teeth, and at last he had to descend into the cow's stomach. "The windows were forgotten when this little room was built," said he, "and the sunshine cannot get in. There is no light to be had." His quarters were in every way unpleasant to him, and, what was the worst, new hay was constantly coming in, and the space was being filled up. At last he cried out in his extremity, as loud as he could, "No more hay for me! No more hay for me!" The maid was then milking the cow, and as she heard a voice, but could see no one, and as it was the same voice that she had heard in the night, she was so frightened that she fell off her stool and spilt the milk. Then she ran in great haste to her master, crying, "Oh, master dear, the cow spoke." "You must be crazy," answered her master, and he went himself to the cow house to see what was the matter. No sooner had he put his foot inside the door than Tom Thumb cried out again, "No more hay for me! No more hay for me." Then the parson himself was frightened, supposing that a bad spirit had entered into the cow, and he ordered her to be put to death. So she was killed, but the stomach, where Tom Thumb was lying, was thrown upon a dunghill. Tom Thumb had great trouble to work his way out of it, and he had just made a space big enough for his head to go through, when a new misfortune happened. A hungry wolf ran up and swallowed the whole stomach at one gulp. But Tom Thumb did not lose courage. "Perhaps," thought he, "the wolf will listen to reason." And he cried out from the inside of the wolf, "My dear wolf, I can tell you where to get a splendid meal." "Where is it to be had?" asked the wolf. "In such and such a house, and you must creep into it through the drain, and there you will find cakes and bacon and broth, as much as you can eat." And he described to him his father's house. The wolf needed not to be told twice. He squeezed himself through the drain in the night, and feasted in the storeroom to his heart's content. When at last he was satisfied, he wanted to go away again, but he had become so big that to creep the same way back was impossible. This Tom Thumb had reckoned upon, and began to make a terrible din inside the wolf, crying and calling as loud as he could. "Will you be quiet?" said the wolf. "You will wake the folks up." "Look here," cried the little man. "You are very well satisfied, and now I will do something for my own enjoyment," and began again to make all the noise he could. At last the father and mother were awakened, and they ran to the room door and peeped through the chink, and when they saw a wolf in occupation, they ran and fetched weapons. The man an axe, and the wife a scythe. "Stay behind," said the man as they entered the room. "When I have given him a blow, and it does not seem to have killed him, then you must cut at him with your scythe." Then Tom Thumb heard his father's voice, and cried, "Dear father, I am here in the wolf's inside." Then the father called out full of joy, "Thank heaven that we have found our dear child," and told his wife to keep the scythe out of the way, lest Tom Thumb should be hurt with it. Then he drew near and struck the wolf such a blow on the head that he fell down dead. And then he fetched a knife and a pair of scissors, slit up the wolf's body, and let out the little fellow. "Oh, what anxiety we have felt about you," said the father. "Yes, father, I have seen a good deal of the world, and I am very glad to breathe fresh air again." "And where have you been all this time?" asked his father. "Oh, I have been in a mouse hole and a snail's shell, in a cow's stomach and a wolf's inside. Now, I think, I will stay at home. And we will not part with you for all the kingdoms of the world," cried the parents, as they kissed and hugged their dear little Tom Thumb. And they gave him something to eat and drink, and a new suit of clothes, as his old ones were soiled with travel. Allerleirauh. There was once on a time a king who had a wife with golden hair, and she was so beautiful that her equal was not to be found on earth. It came to pass that she lay ill, and as she felt that she must soon die, she called the king and said, "If thou wishest to marry again after my death, take no one who is not quite as beautiful as I am, and who has not just such golden hair as I have. This thou must promise me." And after the king had promised her this, she closed her eyes and died. For a long time the king could not be comforted, and had no thought of taking another wife. At length his counselors said, "There is no help for it. The king must marry again, that we may have a queen." And now messengers were sent about far and wide to seek a bride who equaled the late queen in beauty. In the whole world, however, None was to be found, and even if one had been found, still there would have been no one who had such golden hair. So the messengers came home as they went. Now the king had a daughter who was just as beautiful as her dead mother and had the same golden hair. When she was grown up, the king looked at her one day and saw that in every respect she was like his late wife, and suddenly felt a violent love for her. Then he spake to his counselors, "I will marry my daughter, for she is the counterpart of my late wife. Otherwise I can find no bride who resembles her." When the counselors heard that, they were shocked and said, "God has forbidden a father to marry his daughter. No good can come from such a crime, and the kingdom will be involved in the ruin." The daughter was still more shocked when she became aware of her father's resolution, but hoped to turn him from his design. Then she said to him, "Before I fulfill your wish, I must have 3 dresses, one as golden as the sun, one as silvery as the moon, and one as bright as the stars. Besides this, I wish for a mantle of 1,000 different kinds of fur and hair joined together, and one of every kind of animal in your kingdom must give a piece of his skin for it." But she thought, "To get that will be quite impossible, and thus I shall divert my father from his wicked intentions." The king, however, did not give it up, and the cleverest maidens in his kingdom had to weave the 3 dresses, one as golden as the sun, one as silvery as the moon, and one as bright as the stars, and his huntsman had to catch one of every kind of animal in the whole of his kingdom, and take from it a piece of its skin. And out of these was made a mantle of 1,000 different kinds of fur. At length, when all was ready, the king caused the mantle to be brought, spread it out before her, and said, "The wedding shall be tomorrow." When, therefore, the king's daughter saw that there was no longer any hope of turning her father's heart, she resolved to run away from him. In the night, whilst everyone was asleep, she got up and took 3 different things from her treasures: a golden ring, a golden spinning wheel, and a golden reel. The 3 dresses of the sun, moon, and stars she put into a nutshell, put on her mantle of all kinds of fur, and blackened her face and hands with soot. Then she commended herself to God, and went away, and walked the whole night until she reached a great forest. And as she was tired, she got into a hollow tree, and fell asleep. The sun rose, and she slept on, and she was still sleeping when it was full day. Then it so happened that the king, to whom this forest belonged, was hunting in it. When his dogs came to the tree, they sniffed and ran barking round about it. The king said to the huntsman, "Just see what kind of wild beast has hidden itself in there." The huntsman obeyed his order, and when they came back, they said, "A wondrous beast is lying in the hollow tree. We have never before seen one like it. Its skin is fur of 1,000 different kinds, but it is lying asleep." Said the king, "See if you can catch it alive, and then fasten it to the carriage, and we will take it with us." When the huntsman laid hold of the maiden, she awoke full of terror, and cried to them, "I am a poor child, deserted by father and mother. Have pity on me, and take me with you." Then said they, "Allerleirauh, thou wilt be useful in the kitchen. Come with us, and thou canst sweep up the ashes." So they put her in the carriage, and took her home to the royal palace. There they pointed out to her a closet under the stairs, where no daylight entered, and said, "Hairy animal, there canst thou live and sleep." Then she was sent into the kitchen, and there she carried wood and water, swept the hearth, plucked the fowls, picked the vegetables, raked the ashes, and did all the dirty work. Allerleirauh lived there for a long time, in great wretchedness. Alas, fair princess, what is to become of thee now? It happened, however, that one day a feast was held in the palace, and she said to the cook, "May I go upstairs for a while and look on? I will place myself outside the door." The cook answered, "Yes, go, but you must be back here in half an hour to sweep the hearth." Then she took her oil lamp, went into her den, put off her fur dress, and washed the soot off her face and hands, so that her full beauty once more came to light. And she opened the nut and took out her dress, which shone like the sun. And when she had done that, she went up to the festival. And everyone made way for her, for no one knew her, and thought no otherwise than that she was a king's daughter. The king came to meet her, gave his hand to her, and danced with her, and thought in his heart, "My eyes have never yet seen anyone so beautiful." When the dance was over, she curtsied, and when the king looked round again, she had vanished, and none knew whither. The guards who stood outside the palace were called and questioned, but no one had seen her. She had, however, run into her little den, had quickly taken off her dress, made her face and hands black again, put on the fur mantle, and again was Allerleirauh. And now, when she went into the kitchen and was about to get to her work and sweep up the ashes, the cook said, "Leave that alone till morning, and make me the soup for the king. I, too, will go upstairs a while, and take a look, but let no hairs fall in, or in future thou shalt have nothing to eat." So the cook went away, and Allerleirauh made the soup for the king, and made bread soup and the best she could. And when it was ready, she fetched her golden ring from her little den, and put it in the bowl in which the soup was served. When the dancing was over, the king had his soup brought and ate it, and he liked it so much that it seemed to him he had never tasted better. But when he came to the bottom of the bowl, he saw a golden ring lying, and could not conceive how it could have got there. Then he ordered the cook to appear before him. The cook was terrified when he heard the order, and said to Allerleirauh, "Thou hast certainly let a hair fall into the soup, and if thou hast, thou shalt be beaten for it." When he came before the king, the latter asked who had made the soup. The cook replied, "I made it." But the king said, "That is not true, for it was much better than usual, and cooked differently." He answered, "I must acknowledge that I did not make it. It was made by the rough animal." The king said, "Go and bid it come up here." When Allerleirauh came, the king said, "Who art thou?" "I am a poor girl who no longer has any father or mother." He asked further, "Of what use art thou in my palace?" She answered, "I am good for nothing but to have boots thrown at my head." He continued, "Where didst thou get the ring which was in the soup?" She answered, "I know nothing about the ring." So the king could learn nothing, and had to send her away again. After a while, there was another festival. And then, as before, Allerleirauh begged the cook for leave to go and look on. He answered, "Yes, but come back again in half an hour, and make the king the bread soup which he so much likes." Then she ran into her den, washed herself quickly, and took out of the nut the dress which was as silvery as the moon, and put it on. Then she went up and was like a princess, and the king stepped forward to meet her, and rejoiced to see her once more. And as the dance was just beginning, they danced it together. But when it was ended, she again disappeared so quickly that the king could not observe where she went. She, however, sprang into her den, and once more made herself a hairy animal, and went into the kitchen to prepare the bread soup. When the cook had gone upstairs, she fetched the little golden spinning wheel and put it in the bowl so that the soup covered it. Then it was taken to the king, who ate it and liked it as much as before, and had the cook brought, who this time likewise was forced to confess that Allerleirauh had prepared the soup. Allerleirauh again came before the king, but she answered that she was good for nothing else but to have boots thrown at her head, and that she knew nothing at all about the little golden spinning wheel. When, for the third time, the king held a festival, all happened just as it had done before. The cook said, "Faith, Roughskin, thou art a witch, and always puttest something in the soup which makes it so good that the king likes it better than that which I cook." But as she begged so hard, he let her go up at the appointed time. And now she put on the dress which shone like the stars, and thus entered the hall. Again the king danced with the beautiful maiden, and thought that she never yet had been so beautiful. And whilst she was dancing, he contrived, without her noticing it, to slip a golden ring on her finger, and he had given orders that the dance should last a very long time. When it was ended, he wanted to hold her fast by her hands, but she tore herself loose and sprang away so quickly through the crowd that she vanished from his sight. She ran as fast as she could into her den beneath the stairs, but as she had been too long and had stayed more than half an hour, she could not take off her pretty dress, but only threw over it her fur mantle, and in her haste she did not make herself quite black, but one finger remained white. Then Allerleirauh ran into the kitchen and cooked the bread soup for the king, and as the cook was away, put her golden reel into it. When the king found the reel at the bottom of it, he caused Allerleirauh to be summoned, and then he espied the white finger, and saw the ring which he had put on it during the dance. Then he grasped her by the hand, and held her fast, and when she wanted to release herself and run away, her mantle of fur opened a little, and the star dress shone forth. The king clutched the mantle and tore it off. Then her golden hair shone forth, and she stood there in full splendor, and could no longer hide herself. And when she had washed the soot and ashes from her face, she was more beautiful than anyone who had ever been seen on earth. But the king said, "Thou art my dear bride, and we will never more part from each other." Thereupon the marriage was solemnized, and they lived happily until their death. The Elves. First story. There was once a shoemaker who, through no fault of his own, had fallen into such deep poverty that he owned nothing in the world except a small piece of leather, enough only for a single pair of shoes. One evening, with a heavy yet honest heart, he carefully cut out the leather, thinking to begin work on the shoes the next morning. Having done all he could, he commended himself to God, laid his head upon the pillow with a clear conscience, and soon drifted into sleep. When morning came, he rose early, said his prayers, and prepared to set to work. But to his astonishment, on the table lay 2 shoes, already finished. They were not roughly sewn together, as one might expect from hurried hands, but stitched with such precision and neatness that they seemed a masterpiece fit for kings. He gazed in wonder, scarcely daring to believe his own eyes. Soon a customer entered the shop, and being taken with the excellent quality of the shoes, paid him a price higher than was usual. With this money the shoemaker bought leather for 2 more pairs. That evening he cut the leather as before, and in the morning he found both pairs finished, fine and flawless. Buyers quickly appeared, and again he earned enough to buy leather for 4 pairs. This pattern continued. Whatever he cut out at night was completed by morning, and the mysterious workmanship never faltered. In this way, his misfortune was turned to blessing. Day by day, he grew more prosperous, until at last he had regained not only independence, but also abundance. Now it happened that, near Christmas, as he sat one evening cutting leather, he spoke to his wife. "What say you, if we keep watch tonight to see who grants us this unseen aid?" The woman agreed gladly, lit a candle, and together they hid in a corner of the room behind hanging clothes. At midnight, when the house lay in silence, 2 tiny men slipped in. They wore not a thread upon their bodies, but were nimble and merry. Sitting at the shoemaker's table, they worked swiftly with their little hands, stitching and hammering with such skill that the shoemaker could scarce turn away his eyes for wonder. In no time, the shoes stood finished, and away the little men darted as swiftly as they had come. The next morning, the shoemaker's wife said, "These small folk have made us rich. It would not be right if we offered no gratitude. They run about with nothing to cover themselves, and must surely be cold. I shall make them shirts, coats, vests, and trousers, and even knit them stockings. Do you, husband, make them each a tiny pair of shoes." The shoemaker agreed with joy, and by Christmastide everything was ready. That night they laid the little garments upon the table instead of cut leather, and again hid themselves to watch. When midnight struck, the little men bounded in, intending to work, but finding no leather, only the neat array of clothes, they stood amazed. Then, in delight, they dressed themselves quickly, admiring how fine they looked, and sang in ringing voices, "Now we are boys so fair to see, no longer cobblers shall we be." They danced and skipped about the room, leaping over benches and chairs, until at last they sprang out into the night and were seen no more. But from that time forward, fortune never forsook the shoemaker, and all that he undertook prospered. Second story. There was once a poor servant girl, humble and diligent. Each day she swept the house clean and carried her sweepings to the great heap before the door. One morning, as she turned to her work, she spied upon the heap a folded letter. Being unable to read, she laid aside her broom and carried the letter to her master and mistress. To their surprise, it was an invitation from the Elves, requesting that the girl should stand godmother to a child at its christening. The girl hesitated, for she was timid and did not understand why she had been chosen. Yet her master and mistress urged her to accept, saying it was unwise to refuse such an honor. At last she consented. Soon 3 elves arrived, small but graceful, and led her into a hollow mountain where their folk dwelt. There, everything was fashioned on a delicate scale, but with a richness beyond words. The child's mother lay in a bed of ebony adorned with pearls, its coverlet embroidered in gold. A cradle of ivory stood near, and the baby's bath was of shining gold. The girl served as godmother with all humility, and when the ceremony was ended, she wished to return home. But the elves entreated her sweetly to remain 3 days. So she stayed, and during that time they treated her with kindness, feasting her with fine dishes, entertaining her with music and dance, and doing all in their power to make her happy. At the end of 3 days, they filled her pockets with gold and silver until she could carry no more, then led her out of the mountain. When she came home, she took up the broom that still stood in the corner, and began to sweep as if no time had passed. But as she swept, strangers came into the house, asking who she was and why she worked there. Then she learned that not 3 days, but 7 long years had flown while she tarried with the elves, and in that time her old masters had died, and all was changed. Third story. There was once a mother whose child had been stolen away from its cradle by elves. In its place they had left a changeling, a creature with a great round head, staring eyes, and greedy lips that did naught but eat and drink. The poor woman, troubled and desperate, sought counsel from her neighbor. "Carry the strange child into the kitchen," said the neighbor. "Set it upon the hearth, light a fire, and boil water in 2 eggshells. Such a sight will make it laugh, and once it laughs, the spell is broken." The mother did as she was told. She placed the changeling on the hearth, set 2 eggshells filled with water upon the fire, and waited. Then the imp rolled its eyes and muttered, "I am as old as the Wester wood, but never yet have I understood to see the like of this strange thing, water boiled in an eggshell thin." At this he burst into laughter, shrill and wild. In that instant, a host of little elves swept into the room, carrying the true child in their arms. They placed it gently on the hearth, whole and unharmed, and seized the changeling away. Thus was the mother's sorrow turned into joy, and her child restored to her once more. Fitcher's bird. There was once a wizard, old and cunning, who knew 100 disguises and 1,000 dark arts. In the villages he would take upon himself the likeness of a poor and feeble beggar, his garments tattered, his shoulders stooped beneath a wicker basket, as though he sought only scraps of bread or alms for his hunger. Yet his purpose was far more dreadful. For when a kind-hearted maiden stretched out her hand to offer him charity, he would seize her with a single touch, and she would be compelled, as though by enchantment, to leap into his basket. Then he would stride away on long legs into the depths of the forest, carrying her into his hidden dwelling, and none who vanished with him were ever seen again. Now it came to pass that he knocked one morning upon the door of a man who had 3 daughters, each fairer than the other. When the eldest stepped outside with a piece of bread to feed the poor stranger, the wizard brushed her hand, and in a moment she was swallowed into his basket. He hastened away into the shadowy woods, and after a long journey came to his house, which stood alone in the heart of the forest. The house was filled with splendid things, golden cups, silver dishes, jewels glimmering in the corners, and silken draperies on the walls. To the maiden he spoke gently, saying, "My darling, thou hast all that thy heart could wish for. Here shalt thou live in comfort, here shalt thou be happy." For a few days he treated her kindly. Then he said, "I must travel far, and thou shalt remain here. Here are the keys to every chamber. Explore as thou wilt. But this small key opens one room only, and upon thy life thou must not enter it. Shouldst thou disobey, thy death will be swift. And this egg thou must carry with thee always. Guard it well, for if it be lost, calamity will fall." The maiden promised obedience. When he departed, she wandered through the shining rooms, gazing upon treasures beyond her imagining. But her heart was restless, and her mind tormented by the forbidden door. At length, a curiosity overcame her. She slipped the little key into the lock. The door sprang wide, and horror met her eyes. In the center of the chamber stood a basin filled with blood. Within lay the mangled limbs of many girls who had gone before her. Near it stood a block of wood, and upon it gleamed an axe heavy with murder. In terror she let fall the egg, which plunged into the basin. Though she snatched it out and washed it with trembling hands, the stain of blood clung fast, returning no matter how she scrubbed. Soon the wizard returned. "Give me the keys and the egg," said he. She placed them in his hand, but he saw at once the crimson mark. His face darkened. "Thou hast entered the chamber against my command," said he. "Now against thy will thou shalt go there again. Thy life is ended." He dragged her by the hair, struck off her head upon the block, hewed her into pieces, and flung her body into the basin with the rest. Not long after, he came again to the father's house in beggar's guise. The second daughter, pitying his hunger, brought him bread. At his touch, she too was snared, borne away to the forest, and given the keys and the egg. And like her sister, she yielded to curiosity, opened the dreadful door, stained the egg, and was slain without mercy. At last he came for the third daughter. She was wise and wary. When he gave her the keys and the egg, she hid the egg safely away before she began her search. She, too, entered the forbidden chamber and saw the bloody basin. And there she found her sisters, lying torn and lifeless. With brave heart, she gathered their scattered limbs, set head to shoulders, arms to body, legs in their place. When all was joined, the pieces stirred. The maidens opened their eyes and were restored to life. They embraced her with tears of joy. When the wizard returned, she gave him the egg unstained, and he said, "Thou hast stood the trial. Now thou shalt be my bride." But his power over her was broken. She contrived a plan. She said, "First thou must carry a gift of gold to my father and mother upon thy own back. Meanwhile I shall make ready for the wedding." She hid her sisters in a great basket, covered them with gold so that none could see them, and said to him, "Take this to my parents. I will look out of my little window to watch thee, and see if thou restest on the way." The basket was heavy, and as the wizard staggered under its weight, he longed to rest. But from inside the basket came a voice. "I see thee through my little window. Rise up, go on, tarry not." He thought it was the bride calling, and so he stumbled forward. Again he tried to pause, and again the voice cried out. Thus he was driven on, sweating and groaning, until he reached the parents' house and left the gold and the rescued daughters behind. Meanwhile, the clever maiden prepared for the feast. She placed a skull, decked with flowers and ornaments, in the garret window, so it looked down as though it were the bride herself. Then she covered her body in honey, rolled in the feathers of a feather bed, and made herself into a strange bird no one could know. In this guise, she left the house. On the road, she met the wizard's wedding guests, who called to her, "O Fitcher's bird, how comest thou here?" "I come from Fitcher's house quite near." "And what is the young bride doing?" "From cellar to garret she's swept all clean, and now from the window she peeps, I ween." She answered thus to all she met. At last she encountered the wizard himself. He too asked her the same, and when he looked up to the garret and saw the skull crowned with flowers, he thought his bride was indeed watching for him. He raised his hand in greeting and went within. But scarcely had he and his friends gathered in the house when the bride's brothers and kinsmen, summoned by her sisters, arrived with weapons. They barred every door so that none might escape, and they set the house ablaze. The flames roared and consumed wizard and guests alike. So perished the murderer, and the three sisters were saved. The boots of buffalo leather. There was once a soldier who feared nothing in heaven or on earth. He had marched through thunder and fire, seen comrades fall and captains flee, and yet no tremor ever passed his heart. When his time of service was done, he was given leave to go where he would, with no pension, no trade, and no home to call his own. So he wandered the highways and the hollow lanes of the world, living from the charity of kind souls and the stubborn will of his own stomach. All that he possessed were two things: an old waterproof cloak, stained by rain and smoke, and a pair of high riding boots of buffalo leather, cracked and scarred but still faithful to his steps. One morning, with the dawn spreading pale gold across the fields, he set out without knowing whither his feet would lead him. He walked until the road dwindled into green silence, and the trees grew thick and tall about him. After a time, he came upon a man sitting upon the stump of a felled oak. A fine man, neatly dressed with a green shooting coat and bright buttons that winked in the shade. The soldier, who was a cheerful companion to any he met, gave him his hand and said, "Good day, comrade. May I rest beside you?" The huntsman nodded, and the soldier stretched himself upon the grass. "I see thou hast a handsome pair of boots," said the soldier, glancing at them admiringly. "They shine like a looking-glass, but if thou hadst tramped as far and as hungry as I, they would have lost their polish long ago. Mine, though rough and torn, have gone through mud and mire without giving way. There's good heart in buffalo leather." The huntsman smiled faintly, and the two talked as men do when the road is long. But after a while, the soldier grew restless. "I can stay no longer," said he, "for hunger drives me onward. But tell me, Brother Bright Boots, whither does this road lead?" "That I cannot tell," replied the huntsman. "I too have lost my way." "Then we are shipmates in the same storm," said the soldier. "Let us keep company. Two lost men are less lonely than one." And so they went on together, their shadows growing long among the trees, until night crept over the forest. A faint light flickered through the branches, and the soldier pointed. "There, a fire, or a window. Where light is, there is food." They came upon a low stone house, moss-covered and ancient. The soldier knocked. An old woman opened the door, peering at them with eyes that had seen too many strange faces. "Good mother," said the soldier, "we beg a bite of supper and a corner to lie in, for my stomach is as empty as an old drum." "Go your way," said the crone in a whisper. "This house belongs to robbers. When they come home and find you here, you'll hang on the rafters before midnight. It cannot be worse than starving in the cold," said the soldier stoutly. "If I must die, let it be on a full belly." And he stepped over the threshold. The huntsman would have drawn back, but the soldier seized his sleeve. "Come, Brother Bright Boots, a man's death will find him whether he hides or no." The old woman's heart softened. "Creep behind the stove," she said. "When they have eaten and are drunk, I'll slip you the scraps that are left." Scarcely had they crouched in the shadows when the door burst open and 12 robbers stamped in, laughing and cursing, each with a weapon at his belt. The old woman laid great platters of roast meat upon the table, and the air was rich with its smell. The soldier's hunger gnawed him like a wolf. "I can bear this no longer," he whispered. "I'll join them and eat." "Hold, fool," hissed the huntsman. "Thou wilt bring death upon us both." But the soldier only coughed, loud and hard. The robbers leapt up as one, "Who's there?" cried the captain. In a moment, they dragged the two strangers from behind the stove. "Spies, hang them high." "Peace, friends," said the soldier boldly. "I am hungry. Feed me first, then do what you will." The robbers stared, half in wrath and half in wonder. "Thou hast a stout heart," said the captain. "Very well. Eat, and after that, thy reckoning." So the soldier sat at their table as calmly as if it were his own mess hall. He carved the meat, drank the ale, and called cheerfully to the huntsman. "Come, brother, never was better roast served in any king's kitchen." But the huntsman would not stir. When he had eaten his fill, the soldier said, "Now bring me something good to drink." The captain, amused by his courage, ordered the old woman to fetch her finest wine. She brought a black bottle from the cellar, and the soldier pulled the cork with a loud pop. "Watch well, brother," said he to the huntsman, "for thou shalt see a trick worth learning." He raised the bottle above the robbers' heads. "Here's health to you all, mouths open and right hands lifted." They laughed and obeyed, yet before their laughter was done, they froze where they sat, mouths agape, hands aloft, turned to stone, as if by a wizard's curse. The huntsman crossed himself. "What manner of soldier art thou?" "One who knows a charm or two," said the soldier merrily. "But we'll not leave our feast so soon. Let us take what's ours, for the rogues will sit till I bid them rise." They ate again and drank deep until the stars were pale and morning crept through the cracks. Then the soldier said, "It's time to march. Good mother, show us the way to the nearest town." When they reached it, he sought his old comrades of the guard. "Out yonder," he said, "lies a nest of gallows birds. Come, and we'll pluck it clean." The huntsmen followed, silent but curious. They surrounded the robber's house, and the soldier, holding the same bottle, took a long draught and cried, "Wake, ye villains!" At once the 12 robbers stirred, only to find themselves bound fast by ropes, as if invisible hands had tied them. The soldiers threw them into a wagon and drove them to the town prison. "Now," said the soldier, clapping the huntsman on the shoulder, "our work is done. We'll follow the cart like good idlers." But as they neared the city gates, a strange noise filled the air. Cheers, bells, and trumpets. The people thronged the streets, waving green boughs and crying, "Long live the king!" "What can this mean?" asked the soldier. "Where is the king?" "Here," said the huntsman quietly, unbuttoning his green coat. Beneath it gleamed the purple and gold of a royal robe. "I am he. I was lost in the forest, and thou hast saved my life." The soldier dropped to his knees. "Your Majesty, had I but known—" But the king lifted him up and took his hand. "Thou art a brave man, and I owe thee my crown. Thou shalt never hunger again. Come to my court when thou wilt, and there shall always be meat on thy plate and wine in thy cup. Only remember, when thou wouldst drink a health, ask the king's leave first." And so the soldier who feared nothing lived the rest of his days in comfort, and though he never lost his bold tongue nor his liking for roast meat, he never again found a bottle so full of magic as that which silenced 12 robbers in the night. The Heavenly Wedding. Once upon a time, in a small and wind-beaten village at the edge of the woods, there lived a poor peasant boy who had no father and no mother. He slept under a roof that leaked when it rained, and ate the crumbs that kind neighbors gave him out of pity. Yet he was a cheerful and honest lad, and his heart was clean, though his clothes were not. Every Sunday, when the bells called the people to church, he went with the rest, barefoot upon the frosty road, and listened with wide and wondering eyes to every word that the priest spoke from the pulpit. One morning, the priest preached upon the way to heaven. "Whosoever desires to enter the kingdom of God," said he, "must always go straight onward, without turning to the right hand or to the left." These words fell deep into the child's heart, and he pondered them long after the people had gone home. To go straight onward, thought he, that must be the true road to heaven. Then I will set forth at once and walk straight until I come there. And without another thought, he tied up his crust of bread in a bit of rag, said farewell to no one, and went on his way. He went through the fields where the larks were rising, and over the hills where the wind whispered through the heather. When the sun went down, he slept beneath the trees, and when it rose again, he walked on. Thus he journeyed through valley and forest, over mountain and moor, never turning aside, never resting long in one place. His feet grew sore, and his small bundle grew lighter, yet he murmured not, for he believed that every step brought him nearer to the golden gates of paradise. At length, after many days and nights, he came to a great town such as he had never seen before. The houses stood high and close together, and the streets were filled with people and noise. The boy walked straight onward through all the bustle, for he dared not turn aside, until he came to the largest and fairest building of all, which was a church with tall towers and shining windows. The doors were open, and from within came the sound of singing, as if angels themselves were at their praise. The child's heart leaped for joy. "This," said he softly, "must surely be heaven at last." And he entered. The church was filled with light and the scent of incense. The boy stood still in awe, gazing at the golden altar, at the candles that burned like stars, and at the priest who stood before them in shining robes. He thought that all the people around him were blessed souls, and that the holy music was the song of heaven itself. When the service ended, and the clerk came to drive the people out, the boy sat down upon the floor and folded his hands. "No," said he gently, "I will not go out again. I am glad to be in heaven at last." "Gee," the clerk, astonished, told the priest, who smiled kindly and said, "If the child believes this is heaven, let him stay. God will teach him in his own way." So the boy remained within the church. The priest gave him a corner to sleep in, and sometimes a morsel of bread. For the lad asked nothing more than to be allowed to stay in that blessed place. Now, in that church there stood an image of the Virgin Mother, with the Holy Child in her arms, carved out of wood and richly painted. The boy, who had never seen such beauty, thought, "That must be the good God himself." And when he looked long upon the little figure of the child Jesus, thin and pale from age and dust, he said to himself, "Dear God, how thin you are. The people must have forgotten to feed you, but I will not let you hunger. Every day I will give you half my dinner." From that day forth, he did so faithfully. Whatever food was given him, bread, fruit, or soup, he divided it in two and laid one part before the image, whispering, "Eat, dear God, and grow strong." And the image, through the mystery of the Lord, did indeed partake of it. The food would vanish by morning, and soon the wooden cheeks grew fair and round, the hands seemed fuller, and even the priest marveled, saying, "It is strange, the image grows more lifelike every week." One day he watched and discovered the reason. Hidden behind a pillar The priest saw the boy bring his meal and set it before the statue, saw him smile up with such pure love that tears came into the priest's eyes. "Dear God," said the boy, "I have brought you bread and milk again. Do eat it, for I have little, but I share it gladly." And then the priest beheld a wonder, for the image bowed its head as if in thanks, and when the boy turned away, the offering was gone. Time passed, and the child fell sick. For 8 long days he lay upon his straw bed in the vestry, unable to rise. The priest tended him with care, but his strength was small, and his eyes dimmed like candles before dawn. Yet when at last he could stand again, the first thing he did was take his food, though small, to the image. "Dear God," he said softly, "do not be angry that I have brought nothing for so long. I was ill and could not get up." Then the image, with voice gentle and sweet as morning bells, answered, "I have seen thy goodwill, and it is enough for me. Next Sunday thou shalt go with me to the wedding." The boy's heart overflowed with joy, and he ran to tell the priest, who trembled when he heard it. "Ask the Holy Mother," said he, "whether I too may come to that wedding." But when the child asked, the image said, "No, thou alone." The priest, fearing what the words might mean, prepared the boy for the holy sacrament. When Sunday came, he dressed the child in clean linen and led him before the altar. The boy's face shone as though lit from within, and his eyes were bright as stars. When the priest placed the host upon his tongue, the child smiled once, sighed softly, and fell still. His little body rested in peace, but his soul went straight onward, just as he had always walked, into the true heaven, to the eternal wedding feast of the Lamb. And so it was that the poor peasant boy, who believed the word of God as simply as he heard it, found his way straight to heaven without ever turning aside. Princess Mouseskin. Once upon a time, in a kingdom ringed by forests and mountains, and bathed in the scent of pine and rose, there lived a king who had 3 daughters. Each was fair and graceful, but none alike in temper. The eldest was proud and stately, with eyes as cold and bright as the jewels she wore. The second was merry and charming, and her laughter could be heard even through the heavy doors of the royal hall. The youngest, though quiet and modest, had a heart as clear as spring water, and a kindness that reached even the lowliest in the court. Now the king was growing old, and it pleased him to test the love of his children, so that he might know to which daughter he should leave his throne and treasures. One bright morning, when the court was gathered and music played softly in the distance, he summoned his daughters to stand before him. "My beloved children," he said, his voice grave but gentle, "tell me truly, which of you loves me the most?" The eldest, stepping forward, bowed deeply and said, "Father, I love you more than the whole kingdom, more than the sun that shines upon it." The courtiers nodded in approval, and the king stroked his beard, pleased by her devotion. Then the second daughter, not wishing to be outdone, spoke in her silvery voice, "I love you more than all the jewels and pearls in the world, for what are rubies and diamonds beside a father's love?" The king smiled again, and the nobles whispered that her words were even sweeter. At last, the youngest daughter, who had stood silent and thoughtful, lifted her eyes and said simply, "Father, I love you more than salt." There was a murmur in the hall. The king's smile vanished and his brow darkened. "Salt?" he cried. "Is that all? You value me as one values a pinch of seasoning?" His anger flared like fire in dry straw. "Ungrateful child, You shall taste the bitterness of the forest, rather than the comfort of my palace. Take her away, and see that she never returns." Though the courtiers pleaded for mercy, the king's heart was hard as stone. He ordered one of his servants to lead the poor girl deep into the woods and there take her life. So it happened that the servant, trembling with pity, led the princess beneath the shadowy trees, where the birds sang sadly, and the moss was thick beneath their feet. But when they came to a lonely glade, he fell to his knees and said, "Dearest princess, I cannot harm you. I have served you since your cradle, and I would sooner die than spill your blood." The girl, whose eyes were bright with tears, thanked him and whispered, "Then let us deceive my father's wrath. Take this ring as proof that I am gone, and let me find my own fate in the wide world." She begged him to make her a cloak of mouse skins, for in that forest the mice were many, and their soft hides could be sewn together. The servant obeyed, and when the cloak was finished, the princess wrapped herself in it and vanished among the trees, looking like a small gray creature of the wild. After many days of wandering, she reached the gates of a neighboring kingdom. She cut her golden hair short, bound it beneath a cap, and went before the king's steward to ask for work. "What can you do?" asked the steward. "Anything, good sir," said she, "for I am young and willing." Seeing her humble manner and thinking her a boy, the steward took her in to serve in the royal household. From that day forth, she was known only as Mouseskin. Now it was the custom of this king that when he returned weary from the hunt, he would toss his muddy boots toward his servant's head in jest. Poor Mouseskin bore this in silence, though each night she wiped her eyes when no one could see. But she served so faithfully that all in the palace loved her. One evening, as the king sat before the fire, he looked upon his little servant and said, "Tell me, boy, from what country do you come?" Quick as thought, Mouseskin answered, "From the land where they do not throw boots at people's heads." The king laughed at first, but later he pondered her words and found them strange. From that hour he began to suspect that this servant was not what he seemed. So he set his courtiers to watch Mouseskin. They searched her small chamber and found hidden there a golden ring, the very one her father had given her long ago. Thinking it stolen, they brought it to the king. "Where did you get this?" he demanded. Then Mouseskin knew her disguise could not last. She fell to her knees, loosened her cloak, and as the gray skins dropped away, her golden hair flowed down her back like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. The king was astonished, for she was fairer than any maiden he had ever seen. "Who are you?" he whispered, and she told him all, of her father's anger, of her flight through the woods, of her life in hiding. When she had finished, the king took off his crown and placed it upon her head. "You have known sorrow and served with honor," he said. "You shall be my queen." A grand wedding was proclaimed. Bells rang, and messengers rode to every corner of the land, even to the kingdom of her birth. Her father, grown gray with years and regret, came to the feast not knowing who the bride was to be. The tables were laden with silver dishes and goblets of wine, and the air was rich with music. Yet when the guests began to eat, they found that every dish, no matter how splendid, was tasteless. The roast meats were fine to behold, but dull to the tongue, the soups fragrant, but empty of savor. Murmurs spread through the hall. The old king, vexed and hungry, struck the table and said, "I would rather die than eat such food. Then the young queen rose and came before him. Her eyes were gentle, though they shone with quiet triumph. "And yet, my lord," she said, "you once thought salt so worthless that you cast away the daughter who loved you more than all jewels. See now what food is without salt." At those words, the old king started and looked at her more closely. The sound of her voice awakened memories long buried. He cried out, "My child, my dearest child," and tears ran down his face. He fell to his knees, begging her forgiveness. She lifted him up and kissed his cheek. "Father," she said, "let the past rest. I loved you then, and I love you still." And from that day, peace and joy returned to both kingdoms. The old king never again sat at a table without blessing the salt, and he cherished his youngest daughter above all else. As for the queen of the Mouseskin, she ruled wisely beside her husband, and her people said there was none in all the lands whose heart was as kind or whose story more wondrous. And thus the tale ends, as all good tales should, with sorrow turned to joy, and love proved stronger than pride. The Nix of the Mill-Pond. Once upon a time, there was a miller who lived with his wife in quiet satisfaction. Fortune had smiled on their household. They possessed money, fertile fields, and a sturdy mill whose wheels turned faithfully with the flowing stream. Each passing year seemed to pour new blessings upon them, and their prosperity grew so steadily that neighbors whispered that luck itself must dwell beneath their roof. But happiness, like the river, runs in shifting courses. As suddenly as wealth had blossomed, so too did it wither away. Year by year the coffers emptied, the land yielded less, and the strong mill fell into disrepair. At length the miller could scarcely claim the building as his own. He grew weary with care. When he lay upon his bed after long labor, sleep fled from him, and his heart tossed as restlessly as his body. One morning, before even the cock crowed, the miller rose in despair and wandered into the chill dawn air. Perhaps, thought he, the open fields and the fresh breath of morning might ease the heaviness that crushed his breast. As he stepped across the worn planks of the mill dam, the first pale beam of sunlight broke through the mist. At that very instant, he heard the faint ripple of water behind him. Turning in wonder, he beheld a vision. From the pond arose a woman of surpassing beauty. She lifted herself slowly from the depths, her long hair shining like liquid gold. She drew with gentle hands away from her shoulders, yet it fell in gleaming waves to veil her fair white form. The miller's heart froze, for he knew her at once. It was the Nix of the Mill-Pond, the water spirit whose home lay beneath those green depths. His feet faltered, not knowing whether to flee or to remain. But the Nix raised her sweet voice and called him softly by name. "Why dost thou wander so sorrowful in the morning light?" At first he could not speak, for fear held him silent. Yet her words were tender, and soon courage stirred in him. Haltingly, he confessed how once he had dwelt in wealth and gladness, but now had fallen into poverty, so great that he no longer knew how to provide for his household. "Be at peace," answered the Nix, her eyes gleaming like moonlit water. "I shall make thee richer and happier than ever before. Only promise me one thing. Give me the young thing that has just been born in thy house." The miller's thoughts turned quickly. What else could she mean, said he within himself, but some small creature, a kitten perhaps, or a puppy. Surely no great harm in that. And so, desperate for relief, he swore the promise she demanded. Smiling, the Nix sank beneath the pond once more, and the water stilled as though no ripple had ever stirred it. With lighter heart, the miller hastened home, but had scarcely reached the threshold when the maid-servant ran out with joyful cries. "Rejoice, master, rejoice! A son is born to thee." Then the miller stood as if thunderstruck. In a moment he saw the cunning trick. The Nix had known all along of the child, and he had been ensnared by his own careless bargain. With head hanging low, he went to his wife's bedside. She asked in wonder, "Why dost thou not rejoice over our fine boy?" With bitter sighs he told her the dreadful promise. "What use are riches to me," he moaned, "if I am to lose my only child? Yet what can I do now?" Neither wife nor kinsfolk who came to offer congratulations could find counsel to comfort him. But the promise held true. Wealth returned with double force. All that the miller laid his hands upon prospered. His barns filled of their own accord, his cupboards overflowed, and each morning it seemed as if unseen spirits had multiplied his gold in the night. Yet in the midst of his prosperity, his soul was tormented. Whenever he passed the pond, dread seized him lest the Nix rise and claim her debt. He never allowed the boy to wander near the water. "Beware," he would cry, "touch not the pond, for a hand will rise and drag thee under." Time, however, dulls even sharpest fear. Years rolled by, and the Nix did not appear. The child grew to a sturdy youth, strong and clever. At length he was apprenticed to a huntsman, where he proved so skillful that the lord of the land himself took him into service. In the same village there lived a maiden of true heart and gentle beauty. The huntsman loved her dearly, and when his lord perceived it, he gifted them a little cottage. There they married, and their days flowed in peace and tender joy. But fate, which slumbers long, awakens at last. One day the huntsman chased a swift roe from the forest into open fields, and after much pursuit struck it down. Wishing to cleanse his bloodied hands, he went unsuspecting to the waterside. Alas, the very mill-pond his father had so feared. No sooner had he dipped his fingers than the Nix arose, smiling sweetly, and wound her dripping arms about him. In an instant she drew him beneath the waves, which closed and glittered calmly as though nothing had happened. When evening came, and the huntsman did not return, his wife grew troubled. She sought him in field and wood, but found nothing. At last she hastened to the pond, and there discovered his hunting pouch lying on the shore. Then her heart knew the truth. She cried aloud in anguish, wrung her hands, and called his name in vain. The water gave no answer. Only the cold face of the moon gazed back at her. Night after night she haunted the pond's edge, wandering without rest, sometimes shrieking, sometimes sobbing, until at last exhaustion cast her into deep sleep. Then she dreamed. She climbed through wild crags and thorny thickets, beaten by storm, until she reached a summit where all was bright and calm. Before her lay a flowery meadow and a fair cottage, and at its door sat an old woman with hair like snow, beckoning kindly. When morning dawned, the wife resolved to follow her dream. She climbed the mountain and found all as she had seen. The old woman welcomed her, and hearing her grief, said gently, "Be comforted, I shall help thee. Take this golden comb. When the moon is full, sit by the pond and comb thy hair with it, then lay it down upon the shore. Thou shalt see what happens." The wife obeyed. At moonrise, she combed her dark hair with the shining comb, then set it upon the bank. The water stirred, a wave bore the comb away, and behold, the head of her beloved rose from the depths, gazing at her with sorrowful eyes. But before she could grasp him, another wave rolled forth and dragged him down again. Twice more the dream led her to the wise woman, who gave her first a golden flute, then a golden spinning wheel. Twice more she obeyed, and twice more her husband rose, first half his body, then at last his whole form. With the wheel's offering, he leapt ashore and clasped her hand. Together they fled. But the pond roared in fury, and a flood pursued them across the land. Death seemed certain. In terror, the woman called upon the old woman for aid, and at once they were changed, she into a toad, he into a frog. Thus the flood could not destroy them, yet it bore them far apart. When at last they regained human shape upon dry land, each was lost in a strange country, not knowing where the other had been carried. Mountains and valleys divided them. To earn their bread, they both tended sheep for many weary years, hearts heavy with longing. At length, one spring day, chance brought their flocks together in a green valley. They did not know each other, yet they rejoiced in companionship, and thereafter met daily. Few words passed between them, but comfort grew in silence. One night, beneath the full moon, the shepherd took from his pocket a flute and played a mournful tune. At its sound, the shepherdess wept bitterly. "Why dost thou weep?" he asked. "Alas," she answered, "this very air I once played beside the pond, when the head of my dearest rose from the water." At that moment his eyes opened as though a veil had been lifted, and he knew her. The moon shone upon his face, and she recognized him also. With cries of joy they fell into each other's arms, and no one need ask if they were happy ever after. The Master Thief. One day an old man and his wife were sitting in front of a miserable house, resting a while from their work. Suddenly, a splendid carriage with 4 black horses came driving up, and a richly dressed man descended from it. The peasant stood up, went to the great man, and asked what he wanted and in what way he could be useful to him. The stranger stretched out his hand to the old man and said, "I want nothing but to enjoy for once a country dish. Cook me some potatoes, in the way you always have them, and then I will sit down at your table and eat them with pleasure." The peasant smiled and said, "You are a count or a prince, or perhaps even a duke. Noble gentlemen often have such fancies, but you shall have your wish." The wife went into the kitchen and began to wash and rub the potatoes, and to make them into balls, as they are eaten by the country folks. Whilst she was busy with this work, the peasant said to the stranger, "Come into my garden with me for a while. I have still something to do there." He had dug some holes in the garden, and now wanted to plant some trees in them. "Have you no children?" asked the stranger, "who could help you with your work?" "No," answered the peasant. "I had a son, it is true, but it is long since he went out into the world. He was a ne'er-do-well, sharp and knowing, but he would learn nothing and was full of bad tricks. At last he ran away from me, and since then I have heard nothing of him." The old man took a young tree, put it in a hole, drove in a post beside it, and when he had shoveled in some earth and had trampled it firmly down, he tied the stem of the tree above, below, and in the middle, fast to the post by a rope of straw. "But tell me," said the stranger, "why you don't tie that crooked, knotted tree, which is lying in the corner there, bent down almost to the ground, to a post also, that it may grow straight, as well as these?" The old man smiled and said, Sir, you speak according to your knowledge. It is easy to see that you are not familiar with gardening. That tree there is old and misshapen. No one can make it straight now. Trees must be trained while they are young. That is how it was with your son, said the stranger. If you had trained him while he was still young, he would not have run away. Now he too must have grown hard and misshapen. Truly, it is a long time since he went away, replied the old man. He must have changed. Would you know him again if he were to come to you? Asked the stranger. Hardly by his face, replied the peasant. But he has a mark about him, a birthmark on his shoulder that looks like a bean. So, when he had said that the stranger pulled off his coat, bared his shoulder, and showed the peasant the bean. Good God, cried the old man, thou art really my son. And love for his child stirred in his heart. But, he added, how canst thou be my son? Thou hast become a great lord and livest in wealth and luxury. How hast thou contrived to do that? Ah, father, answered the son, the young tree was bound to no post and has grown crooked. Now it is too old. It will never be straight again. How have I got all that? I have become a thief, but do not be alarmed. I am a master thief. For me, there are neither locks nor bolts. Whatsoever I desire is mine. Do not imagine that I steal like a common thief. I only take some of the superfluity of the rich. Poor people are safe. I would rather give to them than take anything from them. It is the same with anything which I can have without trouble. Cunning and dexterity. I never touch it. Alas, my son, said the father, it still does not please me. A thief is still a thief. I tell thee, it will end badly. He took him to his mother, and when she heard that was her son, she wept for joy. But when he told her that he had become a master thief, 2 streams flowed down over her face. At length she said, even if he has become a thief, he is still my son, and my eyes have beheld him once more. They sat down to table, and once again he ate with his parents the wretched food, which he had not eaten for so long. The father said, if our lord, the count up there in the castle, learns who thou art, and what trade thou followest, he will not take thee in his arms, and cradle thee in them as he did when he held thee at the font, but will cause thee to swing from a halter. Be easy, father, he will do me no harm, for I understand my trade. I will go to him myself this very day. When evening drew near, the master thief seated himself in his carriage and drove to the castle. The count received him civilly, for he took him for a distinguished man. When, however, the stranger made himself known, the count turned pale and was quite silent for some time. At length he said, thou art my godson, and on that account mercy shall take the place of justice, and I will deal leniently with thee. Since thou pridest thyself on being a master thief, I will put thy art to the proof. But if thou dost not stand the test, thou must marry the rope-maker's daughter, and the croaking of the raven must be thy music on the occasion. Lord Count, answered the master thief, think of 3 things, as difficult as you like, and if I do not perform your tasks, do with me what you will. The count reflected for some minutes, and then said, well then, in the first place, thou shalt steal the horse I keep for my own riding, out of the stable. In the next, thou shalt steal the sheet from beneath the bodies of my wife and myself when we are asleep, without our observing it, and the wedding ring of my wife as well. Thirdly, and lastly, thou shalt steal away out of the church the parson and clerk. Mark what I am saying, for thy life depends on it. The master thief went to the nearest town. There he bought the clothes of an old peasant woman, and put them on. Then he stained his face brown and painted wrinkles on it as well, so that no one could have recognized him. Then he filled a small cask with old Hungary wine, in which was mixed a powerful sleeping drink. He put the cask in a basket, which he took on his back, and walked with slow and tottering steps to the Count's castle. It was already dark when he arrived. He sat down on a stone in the courtyard and began to cough, like an asthmatic old woman, and to rub his hands as if he were cold. In front of the door of the stable, some soldiers were lying round a fire. One of them observed the woman and called out to her, "Come nearer, old mother, and warm thyself beside us. After all, thou hast no bed for the night, and must take one where thou canst find it." The old woman tottered up to them, begged them to lift the basket from her back, and sat down beside them at the fire. "What hast thou got in thy little cask, old lady?" asked one. "A good mouthful of wine," she answered. "I live by trade. For money and fair words I am quite ready to let you have a glass." "Let us have it here then," said the soldier, and when he had tasted one glass, he said, "When wine is good, I like another glass," and had another poured out for himself, and the rest followed his example. "Hallo, comrades," cried one of them to those who were in the stable. "Here is an old goody, who has wine that is as old as herself. Take a draught. It will warm your stomachs far better than our fire." The old woman carried her cask into the stable. One of the soldiers had seated himself on the saddled riding horse. Another held its bridle in his hand. A third had laid hold of its tail. She poured out as much as they wanted until the spring ran dry. It was not long before the bridle fell from the hand of the one, and he fell down and began to snore. The other left hold of the tail, lay down, and snored still louder. The one who was sitting in the saddle did remain sitting, but bent his head almost down to the horse's neck, and slept and blew with his mouth like the bellows of a forge. The soldiers outside had already been asleep for a long time, and were lying on the ground motionless, as if dead. When the master thief saw that he had succeeded, he gave the first a rope in his hand instead of the bridle, and the other who had been holding the tail a wisp of straw. But what was he to do with the one who was sitting on the horse's back? He did not want to throw him down, for he might have awakened and have uttered a cry. He had a good idea. He unbuckled the girths of the saddle, tied a couple of ropes which were hanging to a ring on the wall fast to the saddle, and drew the sleeping rider up into the air on it. Then he twisted the rope round the posts and made it fast. He soon unloosed the horse from the chain, but if he had ridden over the stony pavement of the yard, they would have heard the noise in the castle. So he wrapped the horse's hooves in old rags, led him carefully out, leapt upon him, and galloped off. When day broke, the master galloped to the castle on the stolen horse. The Count had just got up and was looking out of the window. "Good morning, Sir Count," he cried to him. "Here is the horse, which I have got safely out of the stable. Just look how beautifully your soldiers are lying there sleeping, and if you will but go into the stable, you will see how comfortable your watchers have made it for themselves." The Count could not help laughing. Then he said, "For once thou hast succeeded, but things won't go so well the second time. And I warn thee that if thou comest before me as a thief, I will handle thee as I would a thief." When the Countess went to bed that night, she closed her hand with the wedding ring tightly together, and the Count said, "All the doors are locked and bolted. I will keep awake and wait for the thief, but if he gets in by the window, I will shoot him." The master thief, however, went in the dark to the gallows, cut a poor sinner who was hanging there down from the halter, and carried him on his back to the castle. Then he set a ladder up to the bedroom, put the dead body on his shoulders, and began to climb up. When he had got so high that the head of the dead man showed at the window, the count, who was watching in his bed, fired a pistol at him, and immediately the master let the poor sinner fall down and hid himself in one corner. The night was sufficiently lighted by the moon for the master to see distinctly how the count got out of the window onto the ladder, came down, carried the dead body into the garden, and began to dig a hole in which to lay it. "Now," thought the thief, "the favorable moment has come," stole nimbly out of his corner, and climbed up the ladder straight into the countess's bedroom. "Dear wife," he began in the count's voice, "the thief is dead, but after all, he is my godson, and has been more of a scapegrace than a villain. I will not put him to open shame. Besides, I am sorry for the parents. I will bury him myself before daybreak, in the garden that the thing may not be known. So give me the sheet. I will wrap up the body in it, and bury him as a dog buries things by scratching." The countess gave him the sheet. "I tell you what," continued the thief, "I have a fit of magnanimity on me. Give me the ring, too. The unhappy man risked his life for it, so he may take it with him into his grave." She would not gainsay the count, and although she did it unwillingly, she drew the ring from her finger and gave it to him. The thief made off with both these things, and reached home safely before the count in the garden had finished his work of burying. What a long face the count did pull when the master came next morning and brought him the sheet and the ring. "Art thou a wizard?" said he. "Who has fetched thee out of the grave in which I myself laid thee, and brought thee to life again?" "You did not bury me," said the thief, "but the poor sinner on the gallows." And he told him exactly how everything had happened, and the count was forced to own to him that he was a clever, crafty thief. "But thou hast not reached the end yet," he added. "Thou hast still to perform the third task, and if thou dost not succeed in that, all is of no use." The master smiled and returned no answer. When night had fallen, he went with a long sack on his back, a bundle under his arms, and a lantern in his hand to the village church. In the sack he had some crabs, and in the bundle short wax candles. He sat down in the churchyard, took out a crab, and stuck a wax candle on his back. Then he lighted the little light, put the crab on the ground, and let it creep about. He took a second out of the sack, and treated it in the same way, and so on until the last was out of the sack. Hereupon he put on a long black garment that looked like a monk's cowl, and stuck a gray beard on his chin. When at last he was quite unrecognizable, he took the sack in which the crabs had been, went into the church, and ascended the pulpit. The clock in the tower was just striking 12. When the last stroke had sounded, he cried with a loud and piercing voice, "Hearken, sinful men, the end of all things has come. The last day is at hand. Hearken, hearken. Whosoever wishes to go to heaven with me must creep into the sack. I am Peter, who opens and shuts the gate of heaven. Behold, how the dead outside there in the churchyard are wandering about, collecting their bones. Come, come, and creep into the sack. The world is about to be destroyed." The cry echoed through the whole village. The parson and clerk who lived nearest to the church heard it first, and when they saw the lights which were moving about the churchyard, they observed that something unusual was going on, and went into the church. They listened to the sermon for a while, and then the clerk nudged the parson and said, "It would not be amiss if we were to use the opportunity together, and before the dawning of the last day, find an easy way of getting to heaven." "To tell the truth," answered the parson, "that is what I myself have been thinking. So if you are inclined, we will set out on our way." "Yes," answered the clerk, "but you, the pastor, have the precedence. I will follow." So the parson went first, and ascended the pulpit where the master opened his sack. The parson crept in first, and then the clerk. The master immediately tied up the sack tightly, seized it by the middle, and dragged it down the pulpit steps. And whenever the heads of the two fools bumped against the steps, he cried, "We are going over the mountains." Then he drew them through the village in the same way, and when they were passing through puddles, he cried, "Now we are going through wet clouds." And when at last he was dragging them up the steps of the castle, he cried, "Now we are on the steps of heaven, and will soon be in the outer court." When he had got to the top, he pushed the sack into the pigeon house, and when the pigeons fluttered about, he said, "Hark, how glad the angels are, and how they are flapping their wings." Then he bolted the door upon them, and went away. Next morning he went to the count, and told him that he had performed the third task also, and had carried the parson and clerk out of the church. "Where hast thou left them?" asked the Lord. "They are lying upstairs in a sack in the pigeon house, and imagine that they are in heaven." The count went up himself, and convinced himself that the master had told the truth. When he had delivered the parson and clerk from their captivity, he said, "Thou art an arch-thief, and hast won thy wager. For once thou escapest with a whole skin. But see that thou leavest my land, for if ever thou settest foot on it again, thou mayst count on thy elevation to the gallows." The arch-thief took leave of his parents, once more went forth into the wide world, and no one has ever heard of him since,